Thanks everybody for joining us today for our presentation on how data will help firms survive and thrive through uncertain times. I'm Chris Lingiza, Senior Director of Business Development at Procore, and I'll also be joined today by Ken Simonson, the Chief Economist for AGC of America. But before that, just a really quick announcement. If you haven't seen a safe harbor announcement before, please take a moment to read through this. But basically, don't make any future buying decisions based upon any future-looking statements that we make during the event today. Okay, give everybody a moment there. So as I mentioned, I'm Chris Lingiza. I am the Senior Director of Business Development here at Procore. I have an amazing job. I get to work with a lot of really cool technology, but also spent about 15 years in the construction industry before I came to join Procore. And really excited to talk about today's topic and really how it is that we can leverage data in our industry to not just survive the tough times that we're going through right now with COVID and the global pandemic, but also how we can drive our businesses to thrive during this time by leveraging the data that we've had. I also mentioned that I've got Ken Simonson, the Chief Economist for AGC of America. He's going to come on and tell you a little bit about the numbers that we're seeing in our industry and how you can go ahead and make decisions for your business moving forward as well. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about data. Let's talk about the golden opportunity that we have here at hand. In our industry, almost 96% of all data goes unused. Think about that, 96%. That's so much of all the information that we're collecting, whether that be paperwork or on our phones or be in the field or come through emails and text messages. There's so much information that's being collected by the workers that are building projects all around the world, but we haven't really put it to work for us. And one of the biggest reasons is, well, it's not formatted well. It's not collected cleanly. It's not in a place where we can get to it. We don't necessarily know what to look at. We haven't had the tools to leverage that information the way that we want to make business decisions. So when we asked you and we asked the industry how you felt and how your business was handling your business concerns, one of the things that we heard from all of you was you wanted to gain better insights from the data and information that you had. And of course, this fits right in with so much of the information not going unused. We're really going to start focusing on how do we leverage the data and information being collected every single day that you're doing your job to help you drive those decisions moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that Procore is using that data along with analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to really uplevel the construction industry and uplevel your business process. So one of the ways that construction really has done this and Procore has delivered is by leveraging the data that we had to give you insights into the COVID-19 pandemic and how it was affecting construction. And what we were able to do here is we were able to plot out what was happening in near real time across the United States as the pandemic was hitting us. We took a look at when different cohorts of the country were sheltering in place. We were then able to track worker hours measured on a weekly basis, measured from the data that you're providing into the system through daily logs. This is the measurement of everyone who's showing up on a project that is a representation of projects all across the globe and specifically heavily across the United States. Now you can see from this chart that early on we were taking a pretty strong hit to the number of workers that were showing up on projects, which was a measurement to the delays that we were seeing in projects because projects were shut down. But we were also able to graph that recovery and see when we were coming out of that dip, right? On average, and at the beginning of the pandemic and March 1st was what we set our baseline at. And then we tracked those changes throughout that timeline all the way up until today to seeing us that we had made recoveries back to pre-COVID levels, but it's still not as strong as we would like to see it today. Now, that wasn't enough to just deliver worker hours on a scale of the entire United States. We wanted it to be more localized. And by having good data and having it captured in a way that's meaningful, we were able to dive into a state-by-state level. And we were able to break down each one of those weeks by your location, give you insights to see how your state was affected maybe more or less than others. This map is an example of how we showed that progress over the entire timeline of COVID-19 all the way up until where we stand today. And this gave a lot of meaningful insights into businesses on how they could expect to see either their state turnaround or nearby states where they may want to go and pursue work. Now, just looking at location is one problem, but how about the size of your business? So we also took a look at how different sizes of businesses were affected by the pandemic. Now, the initial hypothesis was that small businesses were affected a lot more than others. And the data showed that that was definitely true. Early on in the pandemic, we were seeing that small businesses were greatly affected and still to this day are more affected than some of the medium and large size businesses. It's also interesting to note that those medium businesses, although affected more heavily early on, closed the gap and have pretty much stayed on par with where many of our largest customers are living today as well. Now, we wanted to continue to go granular, and what we heard from the industry is we want to know not just what states are doing what, but how about the major metropolitan areas that many of us are working in? So because we are capturing so much information and data about the projects that you're working on, and because you're putting that information in on a weekly basis, we were really able to dive into some of those major metropolitan areas as well and measure and see how they were being affected differently. These were representations of some of the largest cities in the country, and all of them were handling a little bit differently, with New York, San Francisco, and Seattle taking the biggest hits early on, but then places like Houston that didn't take as strong a hit early on, feeling the effects later during the pandemic. We also were able to see that places like Los Angeles did not take quite as big of a hit as many other parts of the country, and Dallas as well, significantly for a period of time, was staying very strong compared to other metropolitan areas. Now, we have seen some of these areas take a more recent hit, and some of them are because of other factors that we're trying to overlay as well, things like hurricanes and fires happening in California and in Texas. But let's dive in a little bit more to see how this is actually driving business implications for us. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ken, and he's going to talk you through some of the jobs data and some of the information that the AGC is collecting to give you more insights about where we're going.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate the commitment that Procore has made to digging into this data and making it meaningful for people such as myself who are trying to keep tabs on what's happening to the construction industry nationally, by business segment, and by location. And the Procore data has really given us that very timely and granular information that complements the kinds of information we've already been getting from our own surveys and from government data. And so I want to show you how those things dovetail with what Chris was talking about. As you may know, AGC is the leading national construction trade association. We have over 27,000 member companies that belong through a network of 88 chapters that span the country from Alaska to South Florida and Puerto Rico, and from Maine to San Diego and Hawaii. We did a series of quick surveys about the coronavirus and its impacts on construction firms, supply chain, workers, project cancellations, and their outlook. We did those from March through June, and then in August, we repeated our annual workforce survey, which we've done for the last 8 years. And that survey has shown quite a change in the availability of workers, but also some alarming changes in what's been happening to construction in terms of outlook for projects. Specifically, 60% of the 2,000 respondents, and our members do every kind of construction other than single-family construction, 60% of respondents in the August workforce survey said that a scheduled project had been postponed or canceled. That was nearly double the 32% who said that upcoming projects had been postponed or canceled in June, just 2 months before. On the flip side, only 12% said that they had won new or expanded projects as a result of the pandemic. And that was down by nearly half from the 21% who responded that they had won add-on projects such as a hospital remodeling, a testing or screening facility, or in the case of highway and underground utility contractors, closing roads or closing lanes for more hours as a result of the drop in traffic. As you might expect, projects have taken longer than many contractors had anticipated, and for about a third of them, projects had taken longer than anticipated. There were a number of reasons for delays in completing projects. Initially, it was a lack of personal protective equipment. Fortunately, that had pretty much cleared up by June, but about 1/4 of respondents in those coronavirus surveys we did throughout the spring said that they were having trouble getting timely deliveries of materials, parts, or equipment, and about 1/4 said that a lack of personnel on the job was also making a difference. Now, in terms of where companies stand compared to a year ago, 41% said that they had a decrease in employment, and only 27% said that they'd had an increase. Similarly, in looking forward, 29% said that business was already back to year-ago levels or exceeded it, but an even larger percentage, 38%, said that it would take at least 6 months or longer before they got there. And in terms of expecting to add employees, firms remained relatively optimistic. 38% said that they expected to add employees. 38% said they expected to keep the same headcount they had, but the rest were either going to terminate employees or temporarily furlough them. Not only did we get answers from the 2,000 respondents, but as Chris talked about, we were able to break that down in various ways. We looked at union versus non-union contractors. We looked at 31 states from which we got enough answers that we could detail those, as well as the 4 regions nationally. And we looked at contractors who did building construction, highway, utility infrastructure, or federal and heavy projects, as well as 3 different sizes of business by revenue. So all of that information is available on our website. Well, let me broaden the lens to talk about what's happened to construction employment since February. That was the month that both national all industry employment and construction employment hit a peak. Since then, we saw what seemed like a fairly sharp drop in March. 65,000 construction workers, or nearly 1%, lost their jobs. But that was just the prelude to a truly disastrous month in April, when construction employment dropped by over 1 million jobs in a single month. The industry was able to apply for, receive, and put to use Paycheck Protection Program loans that became available at the beginning of April and enabled firms to recall furloughed workers. About the same time, some of the states that had restricted construction activity reopened, and owners who had halted projects underway allowed them to resume. So the industry had a strong rebound in employment in May that continued at a more moderate rate in June. But since then, the industry has diverged. Home building, home renovation, and additions, those have continued to behave very strongly. And from June to September, the residential side of construction added nearly 3% to its workforce. But non-residential construction has just about stalled, as those project cancellations I mentioned have become more numerous. Well, to summarize what's happened over the past 6 months in terms of spending, we have a very mixed picture. Residential spending has been increasing. Non-residential overall has been declining, but there have been some positive niches within the non-residential construction. For instance, warehouse construction up by 5% over just 6 months. Manufacturing construction flat, but some big differences. Electronics and electrical equipment manufacturers, double-digit gains. Food and beverage manufacturing, not surprising given the big shift in demand from restaurants to home consumption, up 18%. These are construction projects for these manufacturing sub-industries. On the other hand, manufacturers of transportation equipment, cars, light trucks, heavy trucks, down 8% as the total vehicle sales have tumbled. And then within the transportation construction segment, that includes airports and freight, rail, and trucking, they're both down. Mass transit up for the moment, but I think this is the last hurrah for mass transit as ridership has dropped precipitously, and the revenue that transit systems get from the fare box also down, or from gas taxes at the federal level down. And so I think we'll see a big drop in investment in mass transit going forward. One other thing I want to show you that we look at every month is what's happening to costs and contractors' prices. Now, as a trade association for the construction industry, we certainly don't try to put prices out there ourselves. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics collects thousands of producer price indexes each month. Most of them are collected directly from manufacturers or other producers, and therefore very specific products. But they also ask a group of contractors each month, and that group is kept confidential. We don't know who it is. What would you charge to put up a particular building? And they ask them about the same building as they asked the same contractor a month ago and a year ago. So they're able to take not a full workup of a bid estimate, but just what would that contractor charge for its overhead and profit margin. And that is used to make a producer price index for new non-residential building construction. 5 building types: healthcare, industrial, office, warehouse, and school. Well, I've contracted the name to be bid price index, and that's what's shown on the bottom line of this screen. It's been basically flat from April to August. In contrast, contractors are paying more for some materials and services. The red line shows the increase in the cost of inputs to new non-residential construction, the thousands of materials and services that go into all types of non-residential construction. That's gone up over 4% in just 4 months, and inputs to new residential construction have gone up even more, driven by unprecedented increases in wood products prices, such as lumber, plywood, oriented strand board. Well, putting it all together, from February to April, the industry lost 1.1 million jobs, or 14% of the employment that had existed in February. That was half as many jobs as the industry lost in the 5-year downturn from 2006 to 2011. The rebound was quite sharp initially, and as of September, 64% of those jobs that were lost had come back. But we're seeing a growing divergence in how those losses have played out. The residential side, that's new single and multifamily construction and additions and renovations to existing homes, has made up 86% of its job loss. But on the non-residential side, less than half. And that job loss, that recovery has really stalled on the residential side. The PPP loans that I mentioned certainly helped contractors rehire workers, but now those funds are running out. And with fewer project announcements and growing number of cancellations, my expectation is that firms will soon be laying off more workers than they'll be hiring. And we're seeing more and more weakness among different private non-residential segments and also state and local government. What's the outlook for the remainder of 2020? Well, I think on the private non-residential side, we will continue to see remodeling of offices, restaurants that had made outdoor dining areas and now may be enclosing them as cold weather approaches, other public-facing spaces that have to create space for testing or screening or waiting areas, and also continued work on some public infrastructure. However, more and more state DOTs are likely to scale back the number of lettings, the size of projects, because of the big drop in gas tax, diesel tax, vehicle registration, and excise taxes. And for toll authorities, an even bigger decline in the toll receipts that they really depend on. Other infrastructure, I think, will really depend on whether the federal government comes through with an increase in support for state and local governments generally, or something targeted to infrastructure. The chances of that happening before January seem to be very dim at this point. And as a result, as I said, I think we're likely to see more contractor layoffs through the rest of the year, and indeed more firms closing. Well, let's go further out. When we get past the worst of the pandemic, I don't know when that date will be, but I think it really depends on having a safe and effective vaccine and a willingness on a large part of the public to take that vaccine and have access to it. Even when that happens, though, I think construction will be slower to rebound than other sectors. So many owners, whether you're talking about a business that was planning to add a new restaurant or store, build a new office headquarters, investors or lenders, institutions such as universities, state and local governments, whatever their revenue source, sales, rents, tuition and student fees and athletic revenue, or state and local taxes, all of those revenue sources have taken a big hit, and most of those owners have also had unexpected expenses. And so I think they're going to be reluctant to go ahead with construction until they're convinced the demand is going to keep growing again. That's not to say that every private segment is in trouble. Clearly, remodeling has been going strong, and even more so, demand for that so-called last mile or last hour distribution center that can deliver things to customers at their homes the same day or within 24 hours. People's use of the internet for ordering things, for working, for their kids to go to school, for the entertainment that they used to go to theaters and casinos and sporting events for, has put tremendous demand on connectivity. So we've seen somewhat more investment in things like fiber optic cable and 5G rollout, and certainly in data centers. Already a hot market, I think will continue to get even hotter. On the public side, it really depends both on the election and on federal funding. As we saw in 2008, talk of a stimulus package began before Election Day, but it really took the seating of a new Congress, and in that case, a new president, to get a bill passed. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the stimulus bill as it was known, passed, was signed into law just 4 weeks after President Obama took office. So it will be possible under the right circumstances for Congress to pass something and get it in place very quickly next year. But until then, I think we're stuck with more gridlock. Well, let me go on and close by looking at the longer run outlook. Once this pandemic is really in the rearview mirror, there are still going to be challenges for construction. Population growth has been slowing throughout the past decade. As birth rates come down, immigration slows sharply. And that means less demand for housing, for schools, for retail, for any kind of consumer-facing sort of construction, as well as constricted revenues for state and local governments, and therefore less to support much public construction. The shift that we've seen over the past years that accelerated so much in the past 7 months between retail and e-commerce is likely to continue, and that will support more investment in distribution structures and data centers, less in retail buildings. We do expect to see more healthcare delivered remotely or through specialized facilities, and we will continue to see an ever-growing share of the population as seniors who will need greater care than they have so far in their lifetime. That will support more age-in-place remodeling, but also more facilities to diagnose and treat and perhaps provide full-time care for them. This will be a challenge at a time that nursing homes have really suffered a blow to their reputation. I do think that K through 12 schools are going to show continuing demand, both in the medium term and much longer. while the school-age population is not growing as much as it was, nevertheless, we do need new schools where new housing developments are occurring, and we also need to have greater renovation and additions to existing school buildings. Demand for restaurants will come back sooner than travel-related expenditures, I think. It's not clear if offices will be decentralizing, moving back to the suburbs, or if demand for office construction will just remain lower. Finally, what's the outlook for where people are going to locate? I don't have an insight into that yet, but I look back a year at what happened in terms of population growth by state. And this map shows that in 2019, we had 10 states in deep red. They actually lost population. The rest of the Northeast, the midsection of the country, and a few other states had very slow population growth. And the strongest growth was in the Southeast, Texas, Colorado, Washington State, and most of all in the 4 intermountain states of Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, which have been leading for several years. As we go forward, I think California and perhaps Washington are going to see even more exodus toward those states, and the Southeast will continue to grow strongly while the rest of the country lags. So I'll leave it there, but anybody is welcome to sign up for my Data Digest, a one-page weekly summary of economic news relevant to construction. Just email me at ken.simonson@agc.org or get hold of the folks at Procore. And I invite you also to visit the AGC website, agc.org/coronavirus, to see more about rules, regulations, best practices, and our surveys and other data. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken, and appreciate you sharing such great information with our entire audience today. But, you know, it doesn't stop here, right? Just because we are dealing with a global pandemic and there's a lot of data associated with it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to stop looking at data and information. Data can continue to improve our businesses. And the reason that it can improve our businesses is because that data informs a lot of the decisions we make on where we're going with our businesses, what we should do with our employees, where we should invest in technology, where we should invest in chasing projects. You know, as Ken mentioned, the changes in the construction price on projects has been pretty flat. And it's a combination probably of the fact that things are a little bit more competitive because there's more projects out there with more bidders on those same projects competing for them, driving some of those prices down against what would normally see some material escalation prices. But it's those data-driven decisions that we make for our business that can separate us from our competition. Being informed, better understanding what it is that we have allows us to make a better path towards the future. And Procore is making even better products with those data network effects. As we collect more data from all of the projects that all of you are using on our platform, we can build smarter algorithms. That allows us to deliver a better product that you're happier to use, which means that you're pumping in more information in this. But this doesn't just apply to our products. This really applies to how it helps you build a stronger business. So think about that same data being driven into your system that allows you to make smarter decisions about which projects to pursue, which staff to put on those projects, which are the ones that are most profitable for you, leads to better and more profitable projects that are delivered on time for a customer that at the end of the day is extremely happy. And all of that can be really informed by the information and the data that we collect on previous projects and on the projects that you're already running. So I wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. We understand that you have a lot going on in your businesses and a lot going on in your lives, and taking some time out to join us to talk about data and how it can really help drive your business forward means a lot to us. So thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to Ken for joining us today and giving us the most recent update of information that we're getting from the data that he's seeing. And we look forward to seeing you all more.